Good morning from the Hinter house. We've been here for the last few days testing out the new iPhone 13s. If you missed the video, go and check the last video where we just show all of the footage that we shot, including all of that FPV goodness. Had a little bit of issues there, but we got it done. Incredible time here at the Hinter house. Here are my thoughts on the new iPhone 13. This year, it's a lot more clear what the differences are between the iPhone 13 mini, the 13, the 13 Pro, and the 13 Pro Max. But overall, the biggest updates I would say would be the battery life, the displays, and of course, the cameras. The battery life on the 13s is incredible. I went through the whole last year on the 12 mini, and typically I could go through the whole day on just one charge, and I'd have about 10% at the end of the day. Now, some people use their phones a lot more and they have to charge their phone throughout the day if they're using the mini. Now we get 1.5 hours more of real use time. That could be the difference for a lot of people who are kind of on the edge and thinking, I can't deal with the 12 mini battery life. Now you might have the option to go with the 13 mini. The 13 got 2.5 more hours of battery life, and that equates to about 17 hours of video playback on the 13 mini and 19 hours of video playback on the 13. And interestingly, the 13 Pro will get 22 hours of video playback, and the Pro Max gets 28 hours, insane battery life. And what makes that interesting is that the Pros have the new display. The 13 Pros now have a 120 Hertz display, which basically means that the screen can refresh at 120 frames per second, which means you're gonna get a lot cleaner and smoother animations when you're swiping through and that sort of stuff. The downside is that's gonna use a lot more battery life, and the speculation was that the 13 Pro would have worse battery life than the 13 because of 120 Hertz. But Apple big-brained it and they decided to go with a variable refresh rate, which means that it can go up to 120 Hertz, 120 frames per second for us filmmaker people. But when you don't need it, it can actually go all the way down to 10 Hertz. So if you're just reading a text message, for example, you don't need the screen to be refreshing at 120 frames per second at 120 Hertz. So you can go all the way down to 10 and save battery life. Whereas the 13 mini and the 13 can't go down. They only stay at that 60 Hertz the whole time. So that's pretty interesting. Not only are you getting a better display, but you're also getting a more efficient display. So you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. Now, is the 120 Hertz that big of a deal? Not really. I wasn't asking for it. I don't think it's like you can definitely see the difference. Don't get me wrong. You can definitely see the difference. But it's not gonna be like, wow, I could never go back to 60 Hertz ever again. And those are great new features, but the biggest new stuff is in the cameras, which is perfect for us filmmakers, content creators, photographers, and more than ever, I think the cameras make sense right now. The 13 and 13 mini have the exact same camera setup, and the Pro and Pro Max have the exact same camera setups. New sensors on every single camera, and that means that all of the cameras are quite gigantic. These 12s all of a sudden look tiny. The 13s, that is the new normal, and they do stick out quite a bit more, and they're almost a little like sharp, like you could just like chop some vegetables maybe with them. The wide camera got a boost on the 13 mini and the 13. The pixels are now 1.7 microns, and that means you're gonna get about 47% more light gathering. And we now have the new sensor shift stabilization that we had on the 12 Pro Max. We now have it on all of the 13s, all the wide cameras, and I gotta say, it's ridiculous how stable the footage is. It's literally gimbal-like. I can't state more how good that stabilization is. The aperture on the 13 mini for the wide camera is now 1.6, which is great, and for the ultra wide, it's 2.4. And this is where it gets interesting. On the 13 Pro and Pro Max, we get even bigger pixels. At 1.9 microns, you're getting about 2.2 more light gathering, and the apertures are quite a bit better. So for the wide cameras, it's now 1.5, and for the ultra wide, it's 1.8, versus on the 13 and 13 mini, 2.4. That's quite a big difference, and that means you're getting about 92% more light gathering, which is a big deal because on the ultra wide, we all know that it starts to fall apart pretty quickly and gets kind of mushy all over the place if you don't have enough light. And of course, we get that third camera on the Pros, the telephoto zoom, which is now 3 times zoom, which is nice. But again, I think for me, it's the weakest of the 3 cameras, and it's the one that I use the least. And lastly, all of the ultra wides now can focus. I actually didn't realize this before, that the iPhone 12's ultra wide camera never actually did any sort of focusing. But now we have autofocus on the ultra wide camera, and that enables the new macro mode, which works really well, I would say. But it's one of those things that you're probably gonna try out a bunch when you first get the 13, and then you're kind of gonna forget about it. But I could see there being times where like, oh, this is great that I can take this macro shot. And it is a little bit weird that in photo mode, if you go close to something, when you're in the 1 time zoom, the wide angle, it actually automatically switches to the ultra wide to do that macro shot. And you can't control that. There's no way of just like forcing it into the wide angle. It will automatically do it for you. And there's a few times where I was trying to get like a shot where there was something in the foreground and it was just like force switching it to the macro mode, even though I wanted to stay on the wide. But other than that, there weren't that many times where it was actually annoying me, but it is a little bit interesting, a little bit of a quirk that it automatically switches and there's no way to control that. Okay, cool, scientific information. Can you actually see a difference? I would say on the wide camera, I wasn't really noticing any crazy differences. The best part is that sensor shift stabilization, which we already had in the 12 Pro Max, but now we have it on all of the 13s, which is really great. But on the ultra wide, you definitely notice the difference. I talked about it already a little bit. As soon as you don't have enough light on the 12, on the ultra wide, it just starts to get really mushy really fast. You lose all detail and there's just so much going on. Now you can definitely shoot with less light on the ultra wides, on the 13s, and not have it fall apart right away. And for me, that's really great. The ultra wide camera is by far my favorite camera on the iPhones. It's the one that I can legit mix into my vlogs or pretty much any video. And most of the time, I don't think people are even realizing that I'm using an iPhone. It's so handy when I don't want to lug around a big camera like this and it's falling down right now. I'm on a run or biking somewhere or jet skiing, and I'm not going to carry around this big camera. I can just pull out my iPhone, film a clip, and it looks great. It looks so good. So I love the updated ultra wide camera. And because of the better aperture on the Pros, more light gathering, which means less mushiness, I'm thinking about maybe ditching the 12 mini. I'm not gonna go 13 mini, and I'm gonna try the 13 Pro, I think. Let's see. All year I've just been waiting for an update on that ultra wide camera, and now we have it. So if you like using the ultra wide as much as I do, I think you're gonna like the 13 Pros a lot, and just the 13s in general too. Then let's talk cinematic mode, the last frontier of computational photography. I call it the last pillar of computational photography, and using AI to make these tiny sensors look more like this massive full frame big sensor that I'm using right now. Is it good? Yes. And no. Are we all gonna be selling our big cameras and fancy lenses? No. Is it a gimmick? No. Am I gonna be filming everything in cinematic mode? No. So cinematic mode at times looks incredible. I'm absolutely blown away by how good it works in certain situations, and actually my expectations were a lot lower than what cinematic mode is right now, already in version 1. No, it doesn't get the blur perfectly everywhere. You know, if you're holding, let's say, a phone like this, and there's like this triangle space here, it's probably gonna miss that, and that's totally fine, I think. If you're really focusing on where you should be, for example, the faces usually, you're probably never gonna notice that stuff at all. Only if you're really pixel peeping, then you're gonna be like, oh yeah, it made a mistake there. And you and you're probably a little bit more attuned to that stuff, whereas most people would probably never even see it. They might notice that it has a bit of a different look to it, but they probably couldn't even put their finger on why they're saying that. And that's kind of my theory here, is that it might even be that computational photography, the shallow depth of field that we can get using software, is just a different look. It won't be the exact same. It'll be similar, but it's gonna be a different look. And that might be just something that we get used to, and that kind of becomes the new normal. Now, with objects, I find that cinematic mode doesn't really work as well right now. It's probably a lot harder for the AI to do it. But for people, and especially when there's separation between the person and the background, or it's a little bit more easy for it to distinguish which is which, it works really well, and it is really impressive. And it's really nice that you can change the focus afterwards. You don't have to be this like focus guru, super good at focusing. You can kind of let the AI do its thing, and then if you need, you can just change it in post. Now, there are some issues also. Right now, in cinematic mode, you can only film in the wide angle and the telephoto on the Pros, and it's stuck in 30 frames per second, and it's only 1080, which that one's pretty reasonable. I think 4K is probably just so much data to go through and do this with. I think we do need 24 frames per second though. That should be completely doable and probably just added in a firmware update. But I also noticed, and I could be wrong on this one, but I don't think that the HDR kicks in cinematic mode. It looks like there's less dynamic range in cinematic mode, or maybe it's just not quite as good as using the normal video modes. And that one's a bit of an issue for me. I love the look of the iPhone cameras in terms of dynamic range. There's just so much. You get more than on these big fancy cameras. But then with cinematic mode, you're not getting as much. So I'm sure that's just like a problem of way too much going on and crazy processing power. But yeah, that's probably the biggest downside, I think, of cinematic mode right now. So you can get that last pillar of computational photography, get that shallow depth of field, but then you have to give up HDR, that better dynamic range. So I think I'm still gonna use cinematic mode at times. I think it's a really cool feature. Am I gonna use it all the time? No, definitely not. I'm probably still gonna revert mostly to the ultra wide, especially because it looks better now. Ugh. Getting old, my knees hurt so bad. Oh. Side note, that stabilization in cinematic mode though, whew, sensor shift, so good. And the last big update for cameras and video especially is the addition of ProRes, which we don't have yet, but it is supposed to be coming on the 13s, and I'm really excited to see how that changes the game in terms of the quality of the video, but also how we edit that iPhone footage. It might become way faster and way easier, which again just plays into the convenience of using a smartphone, your iPhone, as your filmmaking tool. Deppa, thoughts on the new iPhone 13 as you were editing the photos, videos?
I already put my camera for sale. No need. You just have one of these. I can't tell if they're iPhone or DSLR.
I think the photos are just mine. It's actually crazy. You were saying too that like you're like, oh, I took off the portrait mode and I was still getting like depth of field. That's incredible.
And the video, that cinematic blur. Or the wide. It looks just like a DSLR.
There you go. So I did mention already in a previous video that these big, fancy, expensive cameras that are harder to use might be going obsolete because of the new iPhone 13, cinematic mode, all of that stuff, computational photography. But let me clarify, I'm not saying that you or I are now gonna go and sell our Sony a7S or your Canon R6. But the people that are starting out right now with filmmaking, getting into it, photography, the quality is starting to get so good. They're gonna start off with this because it's the easiest, it's convenient, it's got AI, all of this stuff, and they might stick with it. They might never really graduate to the big boy cameras, especially as this technology develops and gets better and better. They might just stick with this. This might be the new tool, and these big fancy cameras and lenses might be like just a thing of the past. Now, it's probably gonna be for a long time still that these are gonna be great, and I can't see them going away completely, but it might turn into more of like a special use that you would use a big fancy mirrorless camera like this Sony a7S III, and most people are just gonna iPhone only. Coming back. I keep saying Canon, Sony, all of the camera companies, they gotta start playing around with computational photography more, and I honestly can't wait to see what that does to these already great cameras that have incredible images and are capable of so much. I wanna see what computational photography can do with these things. It might get a little crazy. So the question is, should you upgrade to the iPhone 13? And I would say if you use your iPhone cameras all the time, photo, video, then yes, heck yes, this is a great update. If you don't really use the cameras as much, you got some better battery life, the displays are better, but I don't think I'd be switching for just that reason. I think the main reason to switch is those cameras, and if you're like me and you use them quite a bit in your workflow for making your videos, and just taking pictures and photos of your family or friends or just your life in general, yeah, I think it's a great upgrade. I think there was really noticeable differences between the cameras. And then it becomes a question of, should you go 13 mini or the Pro Max? And I think it comes down to a few things. If you need the telephoto lens, then it's an easy choice. If you want the absolute best wide and ultra wide, then again, you're gonna have to go with the Pros. Other than that, they're all really great. Overall, I gotta say, I very much like the iPhone 13, but I am a little bit torn. I don't know whether to go with the mini again or get the best cameras and go with the Pro. I think it's gonna go down to the 13 mini and 13 Pro for me. Those are my personal preferences. I wanna know, which one are you guys most interested in? Which one would you get? Which one did you order right now and why? Okay, it's been good. Hinter House has treated us very well. Thanks so much, guys, for having us here. How'd you guys like those FPV shots? That was still the most stressful stuff I've done in so long. Hope you guys enjoyed those crashes, and hopefully we'll come here again. All right, see you guys.